Men of learning and men of action. It was now for Baruch to decide which of the two, Rabbi Simcha Zelig with his vast Torah knowledge and life of solitude, or Zalman Chaim with his manifold and generous activities among the Jewish multitude, came nearest to the Almighty's expectations. Baruch finally came to the conclusion that Zalman Chaim better fulfilled God's ideal for his way of life. He pleased both God and man. Although Zalman Chaim was no longer living in Yanovich, he had left his mark very clearly. At every step that Baruch took, he saw how much the influence of Zalman Chaim had meant to the Jews of Yanovich and surrounding districts. At the Beis Medrash, where Zalman Chaim had been Shamish, Baruch found Zalman Leib giving a shir to a large gathering. Zalman Leib was explaining the shir in an enthusiastic and scholarly manner, but this did not surprise Baruch, who knew him of old as a learned scholar. What surprised and pleased him, however, was the extreme devoutness with which he davened now, as contrasted with the hurried, off-handed way in which he used to say his prayers before, which seemed so devoid of any warmth or positive meaning. Baruch also had the opportunity of observing Zalman Leib at home. When he visited him, he found him deep at study, his face flushed with interest and enthusiasm, as he delved into one of the books of the Maharal of Prague. Baruch felt that Zalman Leib was a Jew with his whole heart and soul, as well as with his mind. There were others in Yanovich in whom Baruch found changes for the better, especially among those who worshipped in the Beis Hamedrash in the marketplace, and were thus under the guiding influence of Zalman Chaim. Take, for example, Pinya the tinsmith. He was among the first who used to come to Zalman Chaim to learn Ein Yaakov. This same Pinya now attended the Gemara Shir, which was expounded by a prominent member of the community whose name was Yaakov Yitzchak. This shir was well known in the town, not only on account of it being given by the aforementioned Yaakov Yitzchak, but because it was attended by the most learned and scholarly Jews of the town. And here was Pinya sitting at the table, not merely a passive listener by any means, but actually participating in the learned discussion which was taking place. Here was proof enough that with patience, perseverance, and love, it was possible to educate and elevate ordinary folk, even though they had no education in their youth. Others who had thus benefited from Zalman Chaim's teaching and influence were Shimon the flour merchant, Shimon the butcher, Five the potter. These three had regularly attended Zalman Chaim's Chumash shir, and it had seemed at that time that they would never attain any higher degree of learning. Yet Baruch now found them studying Mishnayos and apparently having a good understanding of the subject. But apart from the fact that Zalman Chaim had managed to turn these unlearned Jews into something like scholars, their characters had vastly improved too. Whereas at one time they had stood in the marketplace, or in their shops, or at the stalls, engaged in idle gossip, or perhaps more often, quarreling with one another, or hurling epithets at each other, which were not very nice. Now they conducted themselves in exemplary fashion as true God-fearing Jews. There were others too who came to the Beis Medrash to the shir, who Baruch knew were there solely due to Zalman Chaim's influence. There was one whom everyone had once called Shaul the horse thief, and another called Yaakov Zalman the musician. Shaul's nickname speaks for itself. As for Yaakov Zalman, he had been looked upon with contempt for the fact that he used to play to the local landowners in their castles, and was known to conduct himself there in an un-Jewish manner. Now, however, Baruch found them completely changed in their conduct. They had both given up their previous means of livelihood. Shaul had taken up honest work, and Yaakov Zalman now played only at Jewish simchas, and both spent their leisure time at the Beis Hamedrash. Yet a real revelation to Baruch was Mordechai the miller, who had acquired a shop in Yanovich and was now the gabbai at the Beis Hamedrash. This Mordechai, who had spent all his life in a village and had barely understood the simplest shir, now attended a Talmud shir and participated in the discussions. Here was another living example of what could be achieved for the ordinary uneducated Jew. Baruch was now convinced without the shadow of a doubt that the right path for him to follow was not that of Rabbi Simcha Zelig, but that of Zalman Chaim the Shamish, who had spread both Torah and good deeds among the ordinary people. One day, Baruch, who loved to go outside the town to admire God's handiwork, nature, went for a long walk in the country. He sat down to rest on a fallen tree trunk and soon lost himself in thought. His mind went back to the talk he had had with his brother-in-law, the scholarly Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak, prior to his, Baruch's, leaving Vitebsk. It took place on a warm and sunny day in spring, early in Nisan, after the cold winter had passed. It was an absolute joy to sit in the warm sunshine. Baruch was on his way home from his work when, walking through the park, he saw his brother-in-law sitting on a bench. Baruch joined him, and an interesting discussion sprang up between them. Baruch had made a remark about the healing properties of the sun, whereupon his brother-in-law embarked upon a discussion on the question whether it was right or wrong to benefit from something which had served as an object of worship to idolaters. He brought arguments from the tractate of Avodah Zarah, showing that it is permissible to benefit or have pleasure from something not created by man, even though this thing had been used by idolaters as their object of worship. He brought other quotations from Psachim to show how it is possible to deduce that such benefit should be forbidden. Then he himself answered this apparent contradiction by saying, "But the obvious reply to such an argument is that where the object of worship, as is in the case of the sun, which was created by the Almighty in the 6 days of creation, was in existence before the worshippers chose it as a deity, then there is no prohibition to benefit from it. God had created the sun for the specific benefit of mankind. It was given the power to spread light, to give plants strength to grow, and the earth to bring forth food for God's creatures. The sun also had healing properties, which could cure many diseases. The fact that the sun worshippers came along later and deified the sun is no reason for our abstaining from the pleasures the sun holds for man." Baruch remembered how impressed he was at the time with the philosophy of his learned brother-in-law, but now that he had come back to Yanovich, with its revelations of all that Zalman Chaim had achieved in the moral and material uplift of its inhabitants, it seemed to Baruch that scholarly expositions were comparatively unimportant when contrasted with the social welfare work such a Jew as Zalman Chaim, who understood the realities of life and dealt so kindly and helpfully with the everyday problems of people. During his short stay in Yanovich, Baruch cultivated the friendship of Avram Yitzchak, the third son-in-law of Mordechai the Miller. This Avram Yitzchak was entirely influenced by Zalman Chaim in his outlook on life and his activities. He followed in his footsteps by teaching the simple working people and devoting his time to their welfare. Baruch studied the faces of the people sitting around the table at Avram Yitzchak's share. There were old men, younger men, and even youths. Every one of them listened to the share with obvious interest and pleasure. Avram Yitzchak had the power of exposition and the ability to draw and hold the attention of his listeners. To Baruch's astonishment, he saw that one of the pupils was none other than Chaim, the son of Shimon the flour dealer. Baruch remembered him from 3 years ago. He was a real black sheep, an absolute pest. He was up to every kind of mischief. And during the period when Baruch worked for his father, carrying sacks of flour to the bakers, Chaim plagued him at every opportunity. And now Baruch could hardly believe the evidence of his own eyes. Here was Chaim listening as keenly as the others, while Avram Yitzchak went on with his share. His audience was so thrilled with the legends he used to tell them that they talked about them to their friends, and all were inspired by their moral teachings and influence. Baruch once listened as Avram Yitzchak told his class the story of Rabbi Akiva, of how he had been a humble and simple shepherd, uneducated, and in fact averse to scholars. Then he told of his change of heart when already a grown man. Now he began to turn towards Torah and love it to such a great extent that he studied it until he became one of the greatest and most famous figures in Jewish history. Avram Yitzchak told the story with exceptional enthusiasm, obviously wanting his audience to realize the moral of the story, namely, that no matter how late one began one's education, every Jew should be encouraged by Rabbi Akiva's glorious example. Avram Yitzchak always used to say that scholars have a definite duty towards the ordinary folk, and he certainly practiced what he preached, for he utilized every occasion to take them under his wing and care for them in the way he had learned from the Shamish Zalman Chaim.